Operation Anadir, the secret mission. In the summer of 1962, the Cold War was entering one of its most dangerous chapters. The United States and the Soviet Union had spent years competing for military dominance, political influence, and nuclear superiority. Every decision made in Washington or Moscow carried consequences that could affect millions of lives. Neither side trusted the other, and every move was carefully watched. Less than 200 kilometers from the coast of Florida, the island of Cuba had become the center of a global power struggle. After Fidel Castro's revolution, the relationship between Havana and Washington collapsed rapidly. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion convinced Castro that another American attack was only a matter of time. To protect his new government, he turned to Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev for military support. Khrushchev saw an opportunity that could reshape the balance of power. The United States had already placed nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy, close enough to threaten Soviet territory within minutes. From Moscow's perspective, America already possessed a strategic advantage. Deploying missiles in Cuba would not only defend Castro, but also create a powerful bargaining chip against Washington. Inside the Kremlin, only a handful of senior officials knew the full scope of the operation. The mission was given a misleading code name, Operation Anadir, named after a remote region in the Soviet Far East. Anyone intercepting military communications would assume the troops were heading toward the Arctic, not the Caribbean. Throughout the following weeks, Soviet cargo ships quietly crossed the Atlantic Ocean. Official shipping documents described their cargo as agricultural equipment, industrial machinery, and construction supplies. Hidden beneath those crates, however, were components of medium-range ballistic missiles, launch equipment, radar systems, and thousands of military personnel disguised as civilian workers. At Cuban ports, unloading operations took place almost entirely after sunset. As the convoy moved steadily across the Atlantic, every captain aboard the Soviet cargo fleet understood the importance of absolute secrecy. Radio transmissions were kept to a minimum, routes were carefully planned, and crews were instructed never to discuss the true nature of their mission. To the outside world, these ships appeared to be carrying ordinary commercial supplies. In reality, they were transporting equipment capable of changing the global balance of power. When the first vessels reached Cuban waters, security tightened immediately. The harbors were placed under military control, civilian access was restricted, and unloading operations began only after darkness covered the coastline. Trucks waited silently on the docks while armed guards surrounded the area. Large crates were transferred quickly, covered with heavy tarpaulins before leaving the port. The operation demanded perfect coordination. Engineers had already surveyed remote regions of Cuba, where missile bases could be built away from major population centers. Roads were widened, bridges reinforced, and temporary camps established for thousands of Soviet technicians and soldiers arriving on the island. For the Cuban government, this cooperation represented more than military assistance. Fidel Castro believed another American invasion was inevitable. After surviving previous attempts to remove his government, he welcomed Soviet support, convinced that a stronger defense would discourage Washington from launching another attack. Meanwhile, in Washington, intelligence analysts noticed unusual shipping activity between the Soviet Union and Cuba. Reports described an increasing number of cargo vessels arriving with unusually heavy loads. Aerial photographs revealed construction work in isolated parts of the island, but the available evidence did not clearly identify what was being built. Inside the White House, President John F. Kennedy demanded regular intelligence briefings. Although advisors agreed that Soviet military assistance was increasing, opinions differed sharply about Moscow's intentions. Some believed the Soviets were simply strengthening Cuba's conventional defenses. Others warned that something much larger might be unfolding beyond the view of American surveillance. The uncertainty created a dangerous situation. Decisions affecting millions of people had to be made without complete information. Every new report raised fresh questions, but few provided definite answers. Back in Cuba, Soviet engineers worked under exhausting conditions. Tropical heat, heavy rain, and thick vegetation slowed construction. Equipment designed for European climates had to be adapted for Caribbean weather. Despite these difficulties, work continued around the clock because every day of Delay increased the risk of discovery. Military commanders constantly reminded their crews that secrecy was their greatest weapon. Phase 1, in which a single photograph, a single political decision, or a single military mistake could ignite the most dangerous confrontation in modern history. By early October 1962, tension inside the White House had become impossible to ignore. Intelligence reports continued to arrive almost daily, each adding another piece to an incomplete puzzle. Soviet cargo ships were still reaching Cuba. Construction activity was expanding across the island, and military equipment appeared to be arriving in numbers far greater than anyone had expected. Yet there was still one critical question that no one could answer with certainty. What exactly was the Soviet Union building? Inside CIA headquarters, analysts compared shipping records, intercepted communications, and aerial photographs taken weeks earlier. Some believed the Soviets were installing advanced air defense systems to protect Cuba from another invasion. Others warned that the scale of construction suggested something far more significant. President John F. Kennedy refused to act on assumptions alone. He wanted proof. That proof could come only from one source: the U-2 reconnaissance aircraft. Flying at extreme altitude, the U-2 was capable of photographing enormous areas with remarkable detail. Each mission carried enormous risk. If an aircraft was shot down, the political consequences could be as dangerous as the military ones. For several weeks, poor weather had limited reconnaissance over Cuba. Thick cloud cover protected the island from aerial observation, giving Soviet engineers valuable time to continue their work. On the ground, construction accelerated. Launch sites slowly took shape in remote areas surrounded by dense vegetation. Concrete foundations were poured, support buildings appeared almost overnight, and specialized military equipment was carefully positioned under camouflage. Soviet officers constantly reminded their troops that speed mattered as much as secrecy. Every hour counted. The objective was to make the missile force operational before Washington understood what was happening. Meanwhile, Cuban civilians noticed unusual military activity across the countryside. Long convoys traveled at night, roads were temporarily closed, and unfamiliar foreign soldiers appeared in rural communities. Rumors spread quickly, but few people knew the full truth. Many assumed Cuba was simply strengthening its defenses. Only a handful of Soviet commanders understood that the operation involved nuclear-capable missiles capable of reaching major American cities within minutes. Back in Washington, debate intensified. Some advisors argued that the United States should increase surveillance immediately. Others worried that aggressive reconnaissance flights might provoke Moscow into a dangerous confrontation. Kennedy listened carefully to every opinion. He understood that making the wrong decision without reliable intelligence could trigger an international crisis. Finally, authorization was given. New U-2 flights would cross Cuba as soon as weather conditions allowed. Across the Atlantic, Soviet leaders remained confident. Khrushchev believed the operation was still hidden. If the deployment could be completed before discovery, he expected the United States to face a difficult choice: accept the new military reality, or risk a direct confrontation between two nuclear superpowers. It was a gamble unlike any the Cold War had seen. Neither Washington nor Moscow realized how close they were to the moment that would change history. Within days, cameras flying high above Cuba would capture images that would shock the American government, transform global diplomacy, and begin one of the most dangerous 13 days the world has ever experienced. The morning sky above Cuba was unusually clear. After weeks of poor weather, the clouds that had protected the island finally disappeared. For American intelligence officials, this was the opportunity they had been waiting for: a U-2 reconnaissance. Aircraft climbed to an altitude beyond the reach of most conventional fighters. Inside the cockpit, the pilot followed a carefully planned route, knowing that even the slightest mistake could turn the mission into an international incident. As the aircraft crossed western Cuba, its high-resolution cameras captured hundreds of photographs. Every second of the flight produced new images of roads, military camps, construction sites, and isolated clearings hidden among the forests. The pilot had no idea what the cameras had recorded. Hours later, the aircraft landed safely in the United States. The exposed film was rushed to intelligence specialists, where teams of photo interpreters immediately began examining every frame under powerful magnifying equipment. At first, the photographs looked ordinary. Small roads, construction vehicles, storage areas, rows of unidentified equipment. But then one analyst noticed a pattern. The spacing between several large objects matched the layout of known Soviet missile installations. Another expert compared the dimensions with photographs collected during military parades in Moscow. The measurements were almost identical. Within minutes, the room fell silent. The evidence was unmistakable. The Soviet Union was building medium-range ballistic missile sites in Cuba. The discovery triggered an immediate chain of classified phone calls throughout Washington. CIA Director John McCone was informed. National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy received the first briefing. Then came the call that would change history. President John F. Kennedy was told that nuclear-capable Soviet missiles were being installed, less than 100 miles from the American mainland. For a few moments, no one spoke. The implications were staggering. If the missiles became operational, millions of Americans would be within striking distance with only minutes of warning. Inside the White House, emergency meetings were scheduled without public announcement. Officials entered through side entrances to avoid attracting reporters. Curtains remained closed and discussions were held behind locked doors. Kennedy ordered absolute secrecy. The American public would not be informed until every available option had been carefully studied. Military leaders immediately proposed several responses. Some argued for massive airstrikes to destroy every missile site before it became operational. Others insisted that only a full-scale invasion of Cuba could permanently remove the threat. Diplomats warned that either action could provoke Soviet retaliation somewhere else, possibly in Berlin or even against NATO forces in Europe. Every option carried enormous risk. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Soviet leaders remained unaware that their secret deployment had been exposed. Construction crews continued working through the tropical heat, believing the operation was still hidden from American surveillance. That assumption would soon prove disastrously wrong. Inside the White House, Kennedy gathered a small circle of senior advisors to evaluate every possible course of action. Their meetings would remain completely secret, and the decisions made inside those rooms would determine whether the Cold War ended through diplomacy or exploded into the first nuclear conflict in human history. The countdown had begun. The discovery of the missile sites transformed the crisis overnight. Before sunrise, the White House became the center of the most important national security discussions in American history. President John F. Kennedy quietly assembled a select group of senior officials, military commanders, intelligence leaders, and diplomatic advisors. The meetings were classified at the highest level. Even many members of the government had no idea what was unfolding behind closed doors. This group would later become known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, or simply ExComm. Around the conference table, opinions were sharply divided. The military leadership argued that time was running out. Every hour allowed Soviet engineers to move closer to making the missile sites fully operational. Several generals believed the safest solution was an overwhelming surprise airstrike, followed immediately by a full-scale invasion of Cuba. In their view, hesitation would only make the situation more dangerous. Determined not to repeat the same mistake, instead of making a quick decision, he encouraged open debate, asking every advisor to challenge assumptions and consider the consequences of each option. Meanwhile, intelligence specialists continued studying the latest reconnaissance photographs. New missile launch areas were identified. Construction was advancing faster than expected. Analysts estimated that some launch sites could become operational within days if work continued uninterrupted. The pressure inside the White House intensified. Military planners presented detailed attack scenarios. Carrier groups in the Atlantic received preliminary orders to prepare for possible action. Air Force units quietly increased their readiness, while naval commanders reviewed plans for operations around Cuba. Outside the government, however, everyday life continued as normal. Millions of Americans went to work, attended school, and read newspapers without realizing that their leaders were confronting the most dangerous crisis of the nuclear age. Across the Atlantic, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev remained confident that his strategy was succeeding. He believed the missiles would soon be fully operational before Washington could organize an effective response. Once completed, the deployment would dramatically strengthen the Soviet negotiating position, and discourage any future American invasion of Cuba. But events were moving faster than either side expected. Inside the ExComm meetings, one proposal gradually began gaining support. Instead of launching an immediate airstrike, some advisors suggested surrounding Cuba with American naval forces to prevent any additional military equipment from reaching the island. The proposal avoided the political consequences of a surprise attack while giving Khrushchev an opportunity to step back without immediate war. It was a bold compromise, yet no one could guarantee it would work. If Soviet ships refused to stop, if American forces opened fire, or if a single commander misunderstood his orders, the Cold War could become a shooting war within hours. As another tense meeting ended, Kennedy knew that every decision from this point forward would carry consequences measured not only in military victories or political defeats, but in the survival of millions of people around the world. On a path toward nuclear confrontation, after hours of debate, Kennedy reached a decision. The United States would establish a naval quarantine around Cuba. The word blockade was deliberately avoided because, under international law, a blockade could be interpreted as an act of war. Calling it a quarantine gave Washington greater diplomatic flexibility while sending the same military message. The U.S. Navy immediately began moving aircraft carriers, destroyers, cruisers, and submarines into the Caribbean. Within hours, one of the largest naval operations since the Second World War was taking shape. At the same time, American military forces around the world quietly increased their readiness. Strategic bombers were placed on higher alert, missile crews prepared for emergency launch orders, and thousands of troops stood ready in case an invasion of Cuba became unavoidable. Inside the White House, Kennedy prepared to address the nation. His speech had to accomplish several objectives at once. He needed to inform the American people about the Soviet missiles. He needed to warn Khrushchev without provoking immediate war. And he needed to convince America's allies that Washington remained in control of the situation. On the evening of October 22, 1962, millions of Americans gathered around their televisions and radios. Kennedy calmly revealed what U-2 reconnaissance aircraft had discovered. He announced that offensive nuclear missile sites were under construction in Cuba and declared that the United States would not tolerate such a threat so close to its shores. The speech stunned the world. Within minutes, newspapers interrupted printing, television networks switched to special coverage, and governments across Europe, Asia, and Latin America rushed to assess the growing crisis. In Moscow, Khrushchev and the Soviet leadership listened carefully to Kennedy's announcement. The secrecy of Operation Anadir had collapsed. The missiles had been discovered. Now, the confrontation had entered a completely new phase of Soviet cargo ships already sailing toward Cuba faced an impossible decision. Should they continue toward the American naval line? Should they turn back? Or should they attempt to break through the quarantine? A single encounter between Soviet and American warships could trigger gunfire. Gunfire could lead to retaliation. Retaliation could lead to nuclear war. Around the world, ordinary families began preparing for the worst. Some bought emergency food supplies. Others built backyard fallout shelters. Schools practiced civil defense drills. For the first time since the beginning of the Cold War, millions of people genuinely believed that a global nuclear conflict might begin. Within days, the world was now holding its breath. Every radio transmission, every military order, and every diplomatic message carried enormous weight. The next move belonged to Nikita Khrushchev, and whatever decision he made could determine the future of humanity. The hours following President Kennedy's address were among the most dangerous of the Cold War. Across the Atlantic, Soviet merchant ships continued moving toward the American quarantine line. Aboard each vessel, captains waited for new instructions from Moscow. Every decision now carried enormous consequences. A single misunderstanding at sea could trigger a military confrontation that neither side truly wanted. Inside the Kremlin, Nikita Khrushchev faced the greatest challenge of his leadership. His secret operation had been exposed to the entire world. Instead of quietly changing the balance of power, the deployment had created a global crisis. Every move he made would now be watched by allies, rivals, and millions of anxious citizens. At the Pentagon, American commanders monitored the movement of every Soviet ship approaching Cuba. Radar stations, reconnaissance aircraft, and naval task forces reported around the clock. Tension spread through every level of the military. The question was simple but terrifying. Would the Soviet ships stop? American destroyers and aircraft carriers held their positions while sailors waited for orders that everyone hoped would never come. Weapons remained loaded. Pilots sat inside their aircraft, prepared to launch within minutes if the situation suddenly turned violent. Then reports began arriving. Several Soviet ships had slowed down. Others changed course. Some appeared to be turning back before reaching the quarantine line. For the moment, the immediate risk of a direct naval clash seemed to be fading, but the crisis was far from over. The missile sites already inside Cuba continued to grow stronger every day. Construction crews worked relentlessly, installing launch equipment, communication systems, and defensive positions. Even if additional supplies never arrived, the missiles already on the island represented a serious strategic threat. Inside the White House, the executive committee continued meeting almost without rest. Diplomats searched for a peaceful solution while military planners updated invasion plans in case negotiations failed. President Kennedy understood that the world was balancing on a knife's edge. One accidental missile launch, one nervous pilot, one commander acting without authorization. Any of these events could ignite a nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. Behind the scenes, secret diplomatic channels became increasingly important. Messages passed quietly between Washington and Moscow through ambassadors and trusted intermediaries. Although public statements remained firm, both leaders understood the unimaginable cost of open war. For ordinary people, the uncertainty was overwhelming. Families listened constantly to radio broadcasts. Newspapers printed extra editions. Schools practiced emergency procedures. Many believed they were witnessing the final days before a nuclear conflict. Yet even during this terrifying moment, both Kennedy and Khrushchev recognized a crucial truth. Neither side could truly win a nuclear war. Victory would be meaningless if entire nations were destroyed. That realization slowly opened the door to negotiation. The coming days would test the judgment, patience, and courage of leaders on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Every letter, every phone call, and every diplomatic message would carry extraordinary importance. The Cuban Missile Crisis had become more than a dispute over missiles. It had become the ultimate test of whether humanity could step back from the edge of catastrophe. In the days that followed, secret negotiations would determine not only the future of Cuba, but also the future of the entire world. The fate of millions now depended not on the power of weapons, but on the wisdom of the people controlling them. As the immediate danger began to fade, leaders on both sides realized how close the world had come to nuclear catastrophe. The Cuban Missile Crisis had lasted only 13 days, but its impact would shape international politics for decades. Following intense negotiations, the Soviet Union agreed to dismantle and remove its nuclear missiles from Cuba under international observation. In return, the United States publicly pledged not to invade Cuba. Behind the scenes, Washington also agreed to remove its Jupiter nuclear missiles from Turkey, although that agreement remained secret for some time. For President John F. Kennedy, the crisis reinforced the importance of measured decision-making. Rather than rushing into military action, he had insisted on weighing every option, believing that a single mistake could have triggered an irreversible war. For Nikita Khrushchev, the outcome was far more complicated. Although he had secured a promise protecting Cuba from invasion, many Soviet officials believed the confrontation had damaged the Soviet Union's international prestige. The criticism he faced at home would continue to grow in the years that followed. One of the most important outcomes of the crisis was improved communication between Washington and Moscow. Both governments recognized that slow diplomatic exchanges could be disastrous during a nuclear emergency. As a result, the famous hotline was established, allowing direct communication between the White House and the Kremlin to reduce the risk of accidental war. The crisis also encouraged both superpowers to pursue arms control agreements. In 1963, they signed the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, limiting nuclear testing in the atmosphere, underwater, and in outer space. It became one of the first major steps toward reducing Cold War tensions. Military planners, historians, and political leaders continue to study the Cuban Missile Crisis because it demonstrated a timeless lesson. Misunderstandings, secrecy, and miscalculation can push nations to the edge of disaster. More than 60 years later, the Cuban Missile Crisis remains one of the closest moments humanity has ever come to a full-scale nuclear war, and one of the clearest reminders that diplomacy can be as powerful as military strength.